Welcome back to another episode of History Rant. It has been way too long since I've made one of these videos, but just about as soon as I decided I wanted to start making YouTube videos, my schedule got really busy and I didn't have much time to work on them. But the semester's over now, and although my summer is also quite busy, I will definitely have time to make some more videos. So, part of my busy summer involves me working as an intern at Harpers Ferry National Historic Park in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, which is where I am right now at this moment. I couldn't get a really good shot of it with my crappy webcam, but literally right to my left is just this beautiful view out my bedroom window of historic Harpers Ferry and the Potomac River. I'm gonna try and edit in a picture of that. So that's where I am right now, and I'm loving it. And so to get started with my new set of videos, I wanted to do something related to Harpers Ferry. Now, I could not even begin to get into the entire history of Harpers Ferry in one video because there's so much. So I just decided to do one of their most famous stories, which is the John Brown Raid of 1859. So John Brown was born in Connecticut in 1800, and to clear up from the outset one common misconception, he was not black. He was a white man. He was, as we'll see, a very, very strong supporter of the anti-slavery movement, but he himself was a white man. He, as a child, moved with his family to Ohio, and that's where he lived the majority of his life. He grew up in a very religious family and would continue that religious fervor throughout his life. In fact, he would often use it to justify some of his crazy, violent actions as a part of his involvement in the abolition movement. In 1820, Brown married a woman named Diane. They had 7 children, and then 12 years after they were married, Diane died in childbirth. He then remarried to a woman named Mary and had several more children. And over the next several decades, he worked various jobs, he traveled a bit, trying to support his family. Even as he was working to support his family, Brown remained dedicated to a cause that had captured his attention from a very young age. From his childhood, he had been taught that slavery was an evil, and he had made it his mission to rid the world of this evil. After the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, a highly controversial piece of legislation which allowed the territories, soon to be states, of Kansas and Nebraska to decide by vote whether or not they wanted to allow slavery within their territories. Well, in reaction to this act, pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces began to clash in the territory of Kansas, and it became known as Bleeding Kansas because of all the violence that was going on. This was John Brown's first opportunity to make a name for himself. As this fighting is going on in Kansas, John Brown is in the thick of it. With several of his sons and some other supporters, he forms a quasi-military group he calls the Liberty Guards. Their mission? To fight the extension of slavery into new territories. They clash violently with pro-slavery groups involved in a number of skirmishes. Most famously, in 1856, Brown and his supporters brutally murder 5 pro-slavery supporters on the banks of Pottawatomie Creek. In 1857, Brown begins recruiting for a new mission. He wanted to take the fight to end slavery beyond the territory of Kansas and into a slave state. His target? Harpers Ferry, Virginia. At this point in time, Harpers Ferry was a booming industrial town situated on the meeting points of the Shenandoah and Potomac rivers. It was also the site of a large federal armory, in fact, one of the largest federal armories in the country at this time. Over the next 2 years, Brown begins gathering supporters for this mission, and among those who he approaches is none other than famous abolitionist Frederick Douglass. Douglass and Brown had met a few years previously through their involvement with the abolition movement and become good friends. All right, Freddie, here's the plan. We go to Harpers Ferry with 20 guys or something. We capture the federal arsenal, and then all the slaves in the area will rally at our side and form this huge army, and we're just gonna fight the pro-slavery guys and end slavery, and it's gonna be great. You're welcome. John, that is a terrible idea for so many reasons. First of all, the enslaved people of Harper's Ferry aren't just gonna magically come to your rescue. I mean, you're just another white guy with a gun telling them what to do. Why should they trust you? They don't know who you are and what you stand for. Second of all, even if you do magically manage to raise this army, it's still not going to be enough. I mean, yes, we're getting to a point where we might not be able to solve this issue without violence, but it's going to take more than just 20 guys and an army of local slaves. This isn't the right way to do this. I can't stop you, but I'm sure as hell not getting involved, because you're just going to get yourself killed. Well, way to spoil the fun. I mean, what do you know anyway, Frederick Douglass? Although Brown is not successful in getting the support of Frederick Douglass, he does win a significant amount of support, and in 1859, it's time to put his plan into action. In July of that year, he arrives in Harper's Ferry with 3 of his supporters, and he introduces himself as Isaac Smith. He tells the locals that he and his 3 sons are looking to buy a farm in the area and start a new life. He ultimately ends up renting a farm on the Maryland side of the Potomac, a little ways outside of Harper's Ferry. This, he decides, is the perfect place to gather his supporters in secret. It's isolated, has lots of trees and high brush, and will make it very easy for them to go unnoticed. Over the next several weeks, his supporters gradually flock to the farm, and he hides them in the attic of the farmhouse. Even though the farm was isolated, he was still worried that nosy neighbors may be looking around and get suspicious to see all these men gathered on the farm. Even with these men hidden in the attic, he's worried neighbors might be questioning him. So, he appeals to his wife. Hey, honey. So, I'm working on that fun little plan to attack a federal arsenal. Do you think you could come help out? Uh, just like the neighbors are getting a little suspicious, and I don't want them spoiling our plans. And if we have some women around, they probably will stop questioning us because, like, women don't attack federal arsenals, right? Okay, John. I am not about to leave behind our young children to go help you with your crazy, radical, anti-slavery mission. But maybe I can see if some of the girls around here want to come help you out. So Brown's wife does not join him in Harper's Ferry, but he is joined by his daughter Annie and his daughter-in-law Martha. The 2 women arrive in Harper's Ferry that summer, and just as Brown had suspected, it does help to alleviate suspicions. Furthermore, they serve an important purpose in the weeks that follow, cooking food for the men living there and looking after them, and serving as lookouts to be sure that neighbors aren't coming by and nosing around. The women stay for several weeks, and then in September, Brown sends them home because he knows that it's getting time for him to act. On October 16th, 1859, Brown and 21 of his supporters put their plan into action. They arrive in Harper's Ferry in the dead of night and easily overwhelm the night watchman. They take him hostage and go straight to the federal armory, where they outnumber the few guards stationed there. They throw the hostages in the engine house that will later become known as John Brown's fort. Then, Brown's men begin to split up, setting out on different parts of the mission. Some of them go to guard the bridges into the town, and others secure the armory. And yet another group goes out around Harper's Ferry and the surrounding area to take hostages. Part of Brown's plan to really get his message across was to take hostages of the most significant slave owners in the area. His primary target was a man named Colonel Lewis C. Washington, the great-great-nephew of George Washington himself. Brown's men take Washington hostage, and while they're there, they confiscate a sword which had been passed down to him by his great-great uncle. When Washington is brought to Brown's fort and thrown as a hostage, Brown himself takes the sword and promises to take good care of it, and according to some accounts, he carried it with him throughout much of the raid. By the time morning arrives, Brown and his men still have the upper hand. At this point, very few people realize what's going on because they've been so quiet about it. And Brown and his men had cut the telegram lines to Harpers Ferry, making it difficult for them to send word out to neighboring towns. Even so, when morning arrives and the town begins to realize what is going on, word starts to get out, and they send messengers out to alert authorities and local militia. Meanwhile, Brown is not getting the support he had hoped for. Brown's plan hinged upon him getting the support of local slaves who he assumed would rally at his side when they learned of his cause. But just as Frederick Douglass had predicted, they didn't understand what was going on, and they couldn't be certain that they could trust him. So he got very few supporters among the local slaves. Around noon, Brown's men begin to get word that local militia have been raised and are headed their way. One of Brown's supporters begs him to stop the raid and to escape alive while he still can. Okay, John, I know this is really embarrassing for all of us, but nobody showed up to our raid and we don't have an army. And now they're sending the local militia after us and possibly raising federal troops. And we don't stand a chance. We gotta get out of here while we can still make it out alive. But Brown refused to back down. He insisted on taking a stand. And so, as local militia arrive in Harpers Ferry and surround the armory, Brown and his men barricade themselves in the engine house with their hostages. That afternoon, word reaches Washington, D.C. of Brown's raid, and federal troops are sent to bring him down. Those troops are commanded by none other than Colonel Robert E. Lee. Ironic, really, if you ask me, because Lee would, of course, go on to be the famous leader of the Southern Rebellion. But in this case, he was fighting for the United States Army and fighting against an attempt at rebellion. Lee and his men arrive in Harper's Ferry late on the night of October 17th, and the next morning he sends a messenger to Brown with proposed terms of surrender. The messenger is under the instructions that if Brown refuses to accept the terms, he must signal the troops outside and prepare for attack. Brown, quite naturally, doesn't accept their terms, and so the troops outside begin their attack on John Brown's fort. They use a ladder, a discarded ladder, as a battering ram and break down the doors to the engine house, bursting inside and using bayonets to attack the raiders, being careful not to harm the hostages they had taken. Brown and his men are ultimately taken hostage, and his raid ends there on October 18, 1859. Brown is tried and found guilty of treason, and on December 2, 1859, he is hanged for his crimes. But before he dies, in the hours he's questioned immediately after his capture, he says something that really foreshadows what is to come. All you people of the South, prepare yourselves for a settlement of that question that must come up for settlement sooner than you are prepared for it. The sooner you are prepared, the better. You may dispose of me very easily. I am nearly disposed of now. But this question is still to be settled. This Negro question, I mean. The end of that is not yet. At the end of the day, I don't know how to feel about John Brown. Because he was on the right side of history. I mean, he was right. Slavery was terrible, and we needed to end it. But he also didn't approach the issue in the best way. I mean, he killed lots of people in the name of his cause. And when you think about it, had he done the same thing in the name of the pro-slavery cause, he would be a monster. Yet to some, he's a martyr. In fact, opinion from the time of his death was divided much as it is today. For some in the South, when he died, Brown was a monster. He embodied the Northern threat to their Southern way of life. And to some in the North, he was just as terrible. He was putting a bad name and a bad face to the abolitionist cause. But others still, on the more radical wing of the anti-slavery movement, he was a martyr who had died for their cause and whose sacrifice must be honored. It's up to you, I guess, how you want to feel about him. But if nothing else, it certainly is one remarkable story, and one that I get to learn quite a lot about this summer. Thanks for watching. Keep an eye out for more videos. I'm thinking I will probably do some more about the history of Harpers Ferry, seeing as my whole job this summer is to be teaching other people about this history, and this will provide me some good practice. But I've also got a few other topics in mind, so be on the lookout for more videos.
Almost heaven, West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River. Life is old there, older than the trees, younger than the mountains, growing like a breeze. Country roads, take me home.